Good evening, everyone. We are Sharia Crime Stoppers. We're doing this again. Some of you may be so quarantined that you're not sure what day it is. We understand that. We know that Mondays are a special day, so we'll declare it Monday. And on Mondays, we have news analysis programs. And we think, and the feedback you've been giving us, is that those of you watching on Zoom, and we want to welcome all of our new YouTube live visitors. You've been telling us that these are news broadcasts, news analysis like no others that you get to see. So we're very, very grateful again tonight. Tonight we have Christine Douglas Williams with us. Those of you that are coming into YouTube Live may not have heard of her background as much as the others. Christine is an international award-winning broadcast journalist. What a joy for us to have someone with that skill set here. A news analyst, and an author. The Challenge of Modernizing Islam is one of her books, and fired by the government of Canada for criticizing Islam. Wow, what a title. That's another book. Christine has been a federal government appointee in Canada to the Canada's Office of Religious Freedoms and the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. We are really interested in Christine because she writes regularly every day for Jihad Watch. And sometimes we forget to mention that he's an associate editor of FrontPage Mag, which you probably are all familiar with in terms of the reputation of that publication. Christine, thank you so much for being here. Good evening.
Thank you, Dick. It's great to be back with you.
So we're interested in what things are like as you do your daily work, as you live in the country of Canada. And obviously, there's lots of lessons learned for all of North America. When we hear about Justin Trudeau, it's not too hard to think about Barack Obama or Joe Biden. So we invite you to dive in and give us your latest news analysis.
That I'll do. Thank you, Dick. One thing that I usually do is talk mostly about jihad issues, since I write daily for Jihad Watch, and because the nature of my books is about Islam. But before that, when I did a live talk show for 14 years, we covered a variety of issues, mostly political, but there were some lifestyle as well. When we look today, for instance, as to what's going on with coronavirus, my concern is this: that in the midst of everything, we have lost interest in what's called the full gamut of the red-green axis. It doesn't just involve communism, but it also involves Islamic supremacism and jihad as well. Today, of course, I'm going to be talking about, as usual, some of what's going on the jihad front, but I've shifted a little bit today to try to deal with issues with coronavirus, because everybody is under a complete bombardment of information out there, where I'm hearing on one side, there's no way I will ever consider a vaccine from those designed by those globalists. And on the other side, I'm hearing that the vaccine may be mandatory. But in between, there are people like you watching, and others who are saying, what am I getting involved in here? What is my future? From the point of view of informed consent, I think that is critical in a time like this, and it's difficult to even have that informed consent when we're hearing so many voices. So I went through a lot of loads of publications to try to narrow in on just analyzing some of the information out there broadly and narrowing it down to be able to talk to you a bit about what that vaccine in terms of research is actually about, so that people watching can listen to all of the information as much as possible and at least make an informed consent. So my focus today is on the Muslim call to prayer that's happening in Canada, the coronavirus, but there's also something else going on, and that is a gun ban that seems to be coming in Canada, because Trudeau, our prime minister, is very globalist, to the point where he's been accused of being totalitarian, and not without good reason. So that's some of what I'll be dealing with today. So I'm going to delve into it right now, actually. And I'm going to begin, as I said, with an article that I wrote in Jihad Watch. And it was titled, "Islamic Call to Prayer Broadcast Over Loudspeakers Causing Fierce Divisions as Reviled Opponents Fight Back." Now, here's what's going on here. The opponents are being presented by the usual Islamic supremacist interests and the players in among the social justice warriors of the far left in the anti-racism industry, and not everybody is like that. And I keep on saying it's never about everybody, but you've got a large block of social justice warriors that have hijacked the entire anti-racism industry, which is really meant to be based on human rights, including the human rights of people that are being still held slaves today in other countries. I'm talking on a global level here when it comes to Islam, people in Algeria, in Sudan, in Mauritania. And what about the treatment of women? These people are not being considered. And unfortunately, you have certain values that you see coming into Western countries, and that's not being considered. So this Islamophobia industry has taken over, where they're calling anybody with criticisms of Islam Islamophobic. And you've got the other side with the Black Lives Matter, and that movement is actually rooted in communism, where anything that goes on, this hate is being pushed against particularly white policemen. Black on black crimes don't matter, but it keeps on getting pushed. So here I am today talking about the Adhan. It's being presented like, well, it's tolerance. How dare you people criticize the blaring of the Adhan over loudspeakers, the Islamic call to prayer during Ramadan. Have a little more sympathy. That's what they're presenting you with. But come on, it's also being compared to church bells. And the argument is, well, if you could accommodate church bells in a country, why are you being so racist and Islamophobic? You don't want to accommodate this group. You're being nasty about it. This is not anything to do with racism or being nasty. In fact, there are many Muslims in Canada that don't want it. And I'll deal more with that a little later on. But let's talk about, I want to talk to you about the article and the elements that I brought forth to it, because in this day and age, people don't have a lot of time and they don't delve into the meat of a story. A lot of times titles are read and that's where it stops. So let's look at the reasoning behind church bells. If that's being tolerated, why shouldn't the Adhan? First of all, church bells are musical. It's usually, not always, but it's usually just one note of a bell ringing. The Adhan, on the other hand, is a public, loud, disruptive Islamic declaration and sermon that includes Allah is greater, also known as Allahu Akbar. It includes, I testify that there is no God but Allah. I testify that Muhammad is Allah's prophet. Come to prayer, come to security, salvation. And it's repeated, Allah is greater. I testify there's no God but Allah. In fact, the entire message is intoned several times with emphasis on the latter words. So it's loud, it's disruptive. And think about people who may have come from war-torn countries and faced persecution, and they came from maybe Islamic State territory where they're hearing this call to prayer. I know a woman personally who's from Iran, and she says when she hears that call to prayer, sometimes on people's cell phones, where she teaches, it becomes stressful because she was held in jail at Evin prison in Iran. So it brings back memories. And for a lot of people who are persecuted in the name of Islam, it brings back a lot of pain. Plus, it's also being brought forth, what is the purpose of this? Why are we doing this? I'll keep on and we'll discuss why exactly I'm saying this. So here we are, seeing that this group during Ramadan wants this special privilege. Let's look back at Easter, at Passover. It wasn't easy for Christians to have to go through Easter, nor Jews going over Passover, but nobody made any declaration that they wanted anything changed to accommodate it. But here you have certain, not all, certain Muslim groups where they have gone to the cities, and Mississauga is one city, and Calgary now is doing it, where it's being declared that it is allowed despite the noise. In fact, what they're doing is actually changing the noise bylaw during Ramadan to accommodate it. We see the same thing happening in Minnesota. So I'm gonna stop for a second here and talk about a Muslim lady who is very much against it. She was once on my program On the Line several times, which was a live call-in show. And this is what she said, and it's really food for thought here. She says, who's listening to the azan? Are some Muslims driving to the mosques just to hear it? What is the purpose of this futile exercise other than to score points under the flag of Islam as a political movement known as Islamism? She goes on to caution that for Islamic supremacists, it's a political victory, she puts. However symbolic and however pointless is what matters. Hassan has advocated also for saying Merry Christmas loud and clear in the spirit of respect for our heritage. So when you contrast those, to say Merry Christmas has become offensive, but here we have an ad hand being blared over loudspeakers for everybody to listen to, that one religion is above every other. That is ridiculous. Rebel captured a valid point also, and I'll read it because it captures a lot in a nutshell, and that's what I'm trying to get through here. They say, namely, members of one particular faith are being targeted by law enforcement to pay big fines for allegedly breaching COVID-19 safety protocols. Meanwhile, several municipalities are temporarily waiving bylaws as to accommodate another particular faith. Can you possibly guess which religion is enduring the religious smackdown and which one is being lovingly accommodated? I bet you can. Outrage is circulating in Canada over the ad hand. Here's an example. There's an activist I know. Her name is Diane Biederman. She wrote about it on her blog, and she also went on a letter writing campaign to let her voice be heard, that this is not something that we welcome in a country that calls itself indeed multicultural and tolerant of all, not just one, of all. The feedback she got was disgusting by some, including some city councillors out in Nova Scotia. These are the ones that I captured in the article. And they seem to have forgotten that they're public servants. They're paid by the public to represent everybody, not just one group. So here's what she, and I'm going to call names here. She put it up on her blog so you could find it anyway. Councillor Sam Austin. This is, I can't include all of the entire conversation, but I'll include the key points. This is what this guy said. Quote, puzzling that you've never written me objecting to church bells being rung on Sunday. He goes on that she's picking on a minority. So does this man understand the nature of normative Islam and that there's no diversity in normative Islam? Clearly not. He goes on. I'm sorry that your heart is closed and that you've forgotten the basics of Christian teaching. Love thy neighbor. I won't be reading any further hateful emails from you. That's what he tells her. Nuts. From Councillor Wayne Mason. Your emails have now been placed in my archive file unread. I recommend you read this article on the psychology of racism. You may find it useful, and he provides a link. You may also learn from this article about the way social media and the internet have amplified bigotry and hate. He gives another link. From Councillor Sean Cleary, he says, if you actually believe the racist S-H-I-T, he writes, you are saying you're an awful human being. I'm not sure how you'll live with yourself. That is an indictment on anyone who doesn't support the ad hand being blasted on loudspeakers. And another case, in the Greater Toronto City of Brampton, the Peel District School Board has now fired its council chair, Ravi Huda, for posting a so-called Islamophobic tweet. Huda was also a real estate partner at a large real estate company, Remax, and he was fired from that position. Why? Because, okay, he did lose his temper over the issue of the ad hand being broadcast over loudspeakers, and here's what he tweeted out. What's next? Separate lanes for camel and goat riders, allowing slaughter of animals at homes in the name of sacrifice, bylaw requiring all women to cover themselves from head to toe in tents to appease the peace fools for votes, unquote. Huda was not given a reprimand and maybe a second chance for his sarcasm. He was fired instantly for his tweet by Remax and by Peel. The National Herald in India laced into this guy and compared Ravi Huda. And I think we'll be seeing more of this to Indian nationals that are living in Arab countries who've been fired for Islamophobia. That is another story, okay? But I'll start by telling you, and I'm gonna make this very brief, but it's an important story. You may or may not know right now that a vicious anti-Indian campaign has been launched globally. And so what happened here, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but the National Herald dragged Huda into that campaign, and they said that this guy, like those who are being racist toward Muslims, okay, let me get down to the crunch here of what many don't understand. The big battle that we see going on in India between India and Pakistan is over Kashmir, and that has spilled out everywhere. It has spilled out to even in the area of coronavirus, where India, a group, particular Tablighi Jamaat, they were dubbed the super spreader of coronavirus for good reason, because they were gathering in total millions of people and spreading this thing all over the place, even when lockdowns were being urged. So because India started to get upset over this, they started to call Indian nationals Islamophobic. So right now, here's what's going on. Pakistan and Kuwait went to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation as part of that anti-Indian campaign. They went there about so-called Islamophobia in India, when the real issue, as I indicated, is over Kashmir. And Huda's tweet was referring, although testily, to patterns that are actually unfolding in Canada. So although there are many ways that he may have constructively expressed his disapproval, he wasn't really off base when you look at the meaning of his concerns, but that doesn't get talked about in Canada anymore. In dissecting his tweet, let's dissect it for a moment, because this is relevant to everywhere you go. The Islamic veil for women represents complete oppression. There are those that will tell you, some of them I have to question, do they believe it or are they lying to you? It is in the Quran. The complete veil, the complete covering from head to toe is in the Quran. Quran 24:31 addresses it. Quran 33:59 addresses it. And it talks explicitly about covering, where women are only supposed to see through this tiny space in their eyes. They're not even supposed to so much as stamp their feet, lest you hear some kind of a jewelry. They're supposed to be basically stripped of their female identity under this garb. And if they don't, quote, lest they be abused. And that is in Quran 33:59. So the covering is in the Quran. And this has been a big problem everywhere that's led to a banning of the veil, sometimes for security reasons, which is very prudent. And in Muslim majority countries as well, like Morocco, Algeria, and Chad particular, they banned it when there was bombings that took place and it was being hidden under this entire veil. So, well, the whole hijab, the whole niqab, in fact. Also looking at what's going on in Canada, the follow-up to anti-Islamophobia motion N103 has included taking action to crack down on Islamophobia, monitoring citizens for compliance under the guidance of questionable groups that work with the government, like the NCCM, which is an offshoot of CARE, because it was CARE Can, and then it changed to NCCM and Islamic Relief. As for Huda's reference to allowing the slaughter of animals at home in the name of sacrifice, well, how quickly Canadians have forgotten what happened here, because during Eid, last year or the year before, a gruesome cow slaughter was captured on video on private property near Toronto, and it caused an uproar. So did Huda deserve to be fired? It wasn't even discussed. Nobody cared, because conversations about Islam are over. So when you hear people in Canada, like the Prime Minister, talking about diversity is our strength and dialogue and is our strength, there's no dialogue. Dialogue encompasses space for differences of opinion. This is not allowed in Canada on issues of Islam. It's only one way and one way alone. That is a complete shutdown of dialogue. It's a shutdown of diversity, and it is an infringement on people's human rights collectively. Now, recall too that many people, many Islamic supremacists have entered Western countries, and we're seeing such practices like FGM on our soil. And of course, people that are connected to the Muslim Brotherhood, hate preaching in mosques and so on. But some of these practices that have come into Canada, it prompted a bill by the former Conservative Party called Zero Tolerance for Barbaric Cultural Practices Act. And this drew a lot of problems coming from the far left. And the entire bill was nixed pretty much when the Liberals won the 2015 election, because of offenses and even calling certain cultures barbaric. Now, recently, here's what happened here. Just to kind of give you a little comparison about what's going on. The Liberal Riding Association executive, Mark Elias, it shows you how far, a case with him, how far Canada has actually sunk. He agreed 100%, okay? And that's what he said, 100% with the Philippines president, that those who defy the coronavirus lockdown should be shot on sight. He said he'd also like to see snipers posted everywhere, and thinks that Trump supporters should lose custody of their children and be exiled to detention camps. Elias has faced no consequences for his hateful incitement. Instead, people who have concerns about the ad hand, those are the ones facing the consequences, or people who say, look, this is enough. And sarcasm, was it warranted? We can't even have that discussion. Some food for thought again, too, as Canada begins to endure listening to the adhan from mosques over loudspeaker proclaiming that Allah is greater and testifying that there's no God but Allah. In Canada, this is the situation, and this came out of Maclean's article a couple years back. Quote, Tabligis have become a major force in the Islamic reform movement. Virtually every mosque in Toronto has at one time or another hosted members of the group, often traveling from Pakistan to preach and convert Canadian Muslims to the true Islam, unquote. Reform movement in this case, it bears the same context as when you hear the word reform, referring to the Muslim Brotherhood, reform in a certain direction, but not modernization. An undetermined number of mosques we know in Canada and the US, some say as high as 80%, some say higher, have been spreading jihadi ideology behind closed doors. And some people are calling for surveillance of mosques, but there's inevitably going to be an outcry coming from groups like CARE, which are linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. So these mosques, as you well know, are funded by foreign interests. We keep hearing Saudi Arabia, and they still are. But they're also being funded, more and more information has come up about that, by Iran and also Turkey. Now, the India-based Tablighi Jamaat, is an Islamic revival movement, and it's growing exponentially. Just for a brief point about that group, it's rooted in the hardline Deobandi sect. So while claiming to be peaceful, Tablighi Jamaat is tied to Al-Qaeda, it's tied to the Taliban, and it's tied to Kashmiri jihadis as well. So when you connect the dots, you see why this campaign against India is going on. The publication Stratfor, which is a well-known geopolitical intelligence platform, they published a detailed report on the Tablighi Jamaat and its links to the global jihad as well. And the report included the evidence of indirect, they say, connections between Tablighi Jamaat, Kashmiri terrorists, and the Taliban. But not everybody in Canada is willing to be dictated to by kowtowing politicians, nor is everyone willing to sacrifice Canada, I'm happy to say. There's been pushback. Here's where some of it's coming back from. For instance, there's a Canadian. His name is, if I get that pronunciation right, Ram Samarmanian. He has he is in the midst of it actually, preparing a constitutional challenge, and he's got it up on Facebook because he wants to challenge Mississauga for going so far as to change the noise bylaw. And within days, this man had over 7,000 followers and willing to help out, willing to donate toward this cause. But something else has happened. The Mississauga City Council itself had an unexpected outcry of citizens against it. So now there's a motion that's been put forth to start re-examining whether they'll continue with it. So we'll see what happens to that. Okay, so that's the briefing on when it comes to this over loudspeakers is at hand. So if anybody tells you, you know, you're being intolerant, no, you're not. Anybody who understands the content and who is pushing for it in the mosques will realize, and that there are many Muslims out there that are saying, no, you guys don't realize, we don't want to hear it either. It doesn't make any logical sense because the Muslims themselves, they don't all live near the mosques. It is a plot, it is a ploy, it's a declaration of supremacy and victory. That's what this is about. It's not the same as others who do not demand that same kind of special privilege. So with the coronavirus, when you look at the news and the YouTubes that are flying everywhere, it's really hard to know who to believe. It's hard to know who to trust. But I was trying to keep on top of the information, and believe me, to try to keep on top of all that information, you're going to be sitting at your computer 24/7 because they're just coming out every minute. I mean, when I come off this, I'm going to go back and look, and there's going to be a whole bunch of new things coming down the internet, either in YouTube's or on different sites. It's just non-stop. So I decided to narrow in my focus on the health of the public. Maybe what could be helpful, what you might be interested in knowing, because after all, if a vaccine is coming down, do you really want to take this vaccine? And if somebody asks you why you don't want to take it, and you say, well, look, I don't trust Fauci, I don't trust Bill Gates, I don't trust the globalists, that's a good reason. But I just wanted to present to you some of the research behind it and why they're putting it forth, and also why there's good reason to not trust these players. So let's start, first of all, with some of the interesting information that's coming from this, okay? So the information has cast a grim light and really did raise questions about Dr. Fauci, and I'm sure all of you know who he is, if not his position. He's director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and a leading voice in coronavirus, as well as he has a history in the health direction in America. And he's worked very closely, by the way, with the Clintons, with the Obama administration, and with globalists like Gates. So there's a Dr. Judy Mikovits. I'm not sure if you may have seen her her video, but it went viral. Some say she's gotten as much as 8 million views, and if you saw it, you'll understand why. And she's come out loudly against Dr. Fauci, and she said a lot of bad stuff about what's happening. And a lot of people have, of course, attacked her, tried to discredit her. But again, if you listen to some of her information, it makes sense. She's experienced the worst kind of a smearing as well. But let's look at the trust factor for a moment. And I'm gonna stop for a moment to give you another example. CBC in Canada. Okay, and you guys have the same problem going on with CNN. I mean, so many people have just given up on CNN. You know, it's the fake news source, why even bother? But CBC in Canada, what was really peculiar and odd is that they admitted to Epoch Times that it was wrong in information it covered about China. The Epoch Times eventually writes, quoting them, and a letter that they sent, the special CBC edition was devoted to the Chinese Communist Party cover-up of the coronavirus outbreak, which led to the current global pandemic. It included a timeline showing how the Chinese Communist Party concealed information about the outbreak and reprimanded whistleblowers. And it also covered topics such as the regime's disinformation campaign, unquote. That should disturb everybody. So you get the picture, the massive corruption on all sides. Dr. Judy Mikovits, she just released her book, Plague of Corruption. Her YouTube video delves into some secret plot by globalist elites like Bill Gates and Dr. Fauci to use the coronavirus pandemic to profit and grab political power. Well, she also talks about how vaccines can damage people's immune systems. And I think that is fairly common knowledge, in turn making them susceptible to illness like COVID-19. For example, she says that some viruses for vaccines like H1N1, they're cultivated in the cells of animals, which actually some of them actually contain COVID-19. So this is the reason she asserts that so many died in Italy, so many that were among the elderly, and they were immunized using the H1N1. It makes sense, but right now I'm just indicating what she's saying and building up to some of the research out there so that people can start making some informed decisions. So while we're trying to decipher some of this stuff, there have been troubling videos online, heart-wrenching videos of hospital staff in New York City saying that people are being neglected, even wrongly treated due to woeful neglect. One nurse came out and said that some patients were dead for days and nobody even knew about it. Some went so far as to say, when you look at the woeful neglect, you can say that these patients are being murdered. Is it true? Unless you saw, how could you know? But these nurses were in a state. They were in a state of disbelief. They were upset. And unless you're witness, how do you know? So, but here's something that's also going on, and this has been reported again and again, that when a hospital reports a case of COVID-19, they automatically get a $13 million grant. And if a ventilator is used, another $39 million. So reports are coming in from YouTube that if a person died from some other illness other than COVID-19, it may be a heart attack, but they were detected as having a bit of COVID-19 in their system, even just beginning it, that is tallied in the deaths. So the number, they're saying, of COVID-19 deaths are being hiked up to include anybody that had any amount of COVID-19 in their system. So this is the reason they're saying about the higher numbers. And one ICU doctor said that the symptoms of COVID-19 are very peculiar, something that hasn't been seen when it comes to the lungs, because he described the lungs' reaction to it as though you're suffering from altitude sickness. So when using the ventilator, he was saying was a wrong treatment, but when you use it, you get more money. But his opponents, some of them rose and attacked and said, and one article said, what? This guy's nuts. What is he trying to say? That you could treat COVID-19 with Diamox, which is used for altitude sickness? This is not what the man said one bit. What he said was that the condition of the lungs of some of the patients with COVID-19 was not being considered. They were automatically put on ventilators. And some of the nurses were also saying the ventilators were being operated by some nurses who don't even know how to use it, and people were dying, okay? Now, is this really happening? I don't know. How could one know unless you're seeing it or unless you belong to the hospital system and you know it firsthand? And then news came out of the lunatics who thought that Trump actually meant to use Lysol or bleach to clean out your system, of coronavirus, to clean out your lungs and your system, when he questioned experts about cleaning the system of COVID-19. The man obviously meant cleaning it using some antiviral cure or agent, but they are doing anything to discredit this man. And it's in such absurd proportions that people of reasoned thinking should ask themselves, who are these people? Why are they doing this? Can we trust them? And you know what the answer is. And that is what's causing a lot of problems, even with the development of a vaccine. Could you trust these people? And who are these people? And whose side are they on? Whose side is the media on? It's a mess, and it's very clear so far. So I'm providing here what's in the media, but you know exactly what's being out there, and it's difficult to know who to trust. So my advice, and anybody who is into trying to get to the bottom of news, is even though it takes time, it's worth investigating. So now there's this drug that is being ran through by Fauci, remdesivir. It's being touted as a promise. That's all it's being touted as, a promise. It's extraordinarily expensive, and he's expected to fast track it through the FDA. Now, hydrochloroquine has been a huge debate, but here is what the States Association of American Physicians and Surgeons actually said, that it has about 90% chance of helping COVID-19 patients. India and Turkey have used it. And here's what some of the findings were: that deaths per million persons from COVID-19 as of April 27th, okay, that's some weeks ago, are 167 in the US per million, 33 in Turkey, and 0.6 in India. Turkey and India have been using it. A company in Quebec, by the way, delivered 1 million doses of hydrochloroquine to hospitals across Canada in the fight against COVID-19. And only 3 weeks ago, and I applaud this, Canada quietly secured a deal from India with 5 million capsules of hydroxychloroquine. Now, to add a little off humor here when it comes to the issue of trust, the president of Tanzania, Magufuli of Tanzania, he had some doubts about WHO and all of the countries that are using their tests in labs for coronavirus. So he has been sort of a thorn in their side, if you will. And so he decides to pull a stunt, and he provided testing samples. I mean, it's not funny in a deeper sense, but it does give you a chuckle how far this man went. He provided testing samples that put names and ages to these samples, but they weren't really humans. He took samples. He had samples taken from goats, from papaya, yes, the fruit, and these tests all came out positive. Chew on that for a moment. So given everything we're hearing, calling into serious question the integrity of WHO, players like Bill Gates and Fauci, some even saying beware of vaccinations, that they're dangerous and God knows what they could put in them. Some are even talking about possibility of surveillance chips. The big question, the real question is, what about that vaccine? What is that vaccine? What is it? And should be required to take the vaccine? I believe that's completely wrong. It's against your constitutional rights, and it should be fought tooth and nail. And that's just my opinion. And on the other hand, when you give these kinds of opinions like I'm saying here, what if it's a legitimate vaccine and tons of people die because they were fearful of taking it? So we need to have informed consent to be able to make those choices. So to just give a little background about what's going on with the vaccines, okay? Vaccines, even in light of what anti-vax groups have stated, they're very much against vaccines. I'll give you an example of a guy that I interviewed once on the talk show Live. What I particularly respected about this guy is that although he was a naturopath and a homeopathic specialist, he was very well versed in the medical field as well, and he had a respect for it. And he said, you really have to take this in balance, because if you're old and I'm talking really old with a lot of health problems, and you've had pneumonia, and you're susceptible to being to flus, and well, we know it could happen there. People have benefited, and that has been shown. And this fellow has indicated you have to assess the risk based on your condition, based on your age, based on many factors. And yes, it could backfire. For instance, we saw what happened in Italy. Was that a backfire? It's hard to tell. And we know that there's side effects of these vaccines. I don't think these vaccines. I don't think it could be disputed. But at the same time, I'm sure basically everybody listening has been vaccinated against polio, measles, mumps, TB, and all these other kinds of diseases that have basically vanished from civilized nations. And that's why it was the vaccine. So personally, it's hard to really justify a completely anti-vax perspective. But in this day of coronavirus, with the corruption we're seeing, that's where we need to pay close attention. So let's try to decipher what some of this means. So I've broken down some information about the development of what's being called an RNA vaccine that they're saying may be helpful when it comes to trying to develop something with coronavirus, a vaccine. Now, traditionally, with conventional vaccines, we know how it works. Most of us have an idea that the live virus is injected into you, and the immune system recognizes the virus molecules, and they're called antigens, as threats, and your body reacts to them by making antibodies to be able to locate them, find them, and neutralize them. That's how regular vaccines works. And once this happens, the immune system remembers the invaders and how to eliminate them. So traditionally, weakened samples of a live virus, like in cases of the flu, were cultivated, and they've been grown in chicken eggs, but in some cases, they've been grown also in the cells of some mammals and even insects. The process can take up to 4 to 6 months. This is what research is saying, to simply get the right antigens for familiar viruses like influenza, and that kind of changes every year, and that's what it takes longer to do, and that's why it takes so many months. So while summer's here, the spring and then the summer and the fall, these vaccines are being developed and tweaked to try to compensate for what may come and some of the changes and mutations of the coming winter season, the flu season. But the big problem is that when it comes to a brand new germ like COVID-19, it can take so many attempts and years for a vaccine the traditional way to develop. So along comes people like Fauci, the Bill Gates Foundation, and the foundation, by the way, has been at the head of funding vaccinations for I don't know how many years. So what they're saying is they want to look at a kind of a research when it comes to COVID-19, because now that it's in pandemic proportions, they're saying they can't wait. So now the labs are turning to gene-based vaccines. The problem is they haven't been tried and proven. So do you want to be the guinea pig? That's your judgment over this and the impact of what COVID-19 may do in the future. So scientists are using information from the genes of the virus, COVID-19 in this case, the genome it's called. Now the information is used to create a blueprint of the toxin or antigen, and the blueprint is made of DNA. And you all know that DNA contains all the information from your genetics, but there's also something related to DNA, and it's called RNA. So RNA, simply put, it basically decodes DNA. So you could have a DNA virus or you could have an RNA virus. So what they're looking at now is an RNA virus for COVID-19. So, okay, so here's what they're saying. So once that happens, once they start to cultivate it, this virus, what the plan is to inject the RNA of the COVID-19 cells that were cultivated in a lab, a safe amount of that cell, and it's an altered version of it because it has to be lesser, but it prompts an immune response to produce antibodies much the same as the other way, and the proteins needed to trigger your immune response. But your body is doing that. Your body is actually reading this. So we're looking at DNA or RNA being injected into you as something to fight coronavirus in the future. And it hasn't been done. And I find this unnerving. So how do we trust people like Fauci? How do we trust big pharma and globalist government meddling and with alliances that they've formed together between the big pharma, the globalists, and how do you trust these people when you see what's been going on, when you see the kind of political leanings they have, and everybody knows even this new drug that they're developing, hydrochloroquine, has been shown, and they keep on telling you, no, it's not proven, but there are countries using it, there are people that have used it. And at the beginning of when this information came to light and people were debating it, a report came out that not a single person who is already on hydrochloroquine has been getting COVID-19. I can't find that report anywhere anymore. And now new reports have come out and said, well, we don't really see any particular information from it. But there's a drive to shut down its use. It's a very cheap drug, and hence the problem. That drug, by comparison, is exorbitantly priced. About this chip being planted into you. logically, I have to ask myself personally, does that chip make sense when it comes to a vaccine that will be delivered basically to every practitioner through the country that will deliver a vaccine? Does it make sense that they'll inject the chip? Because my question would be, where would that chip go? It can't go, how is it going to go through your bloodstream? It could end up in your heart, it could end up in your lungs and kill you. So from that point of view, it doesn't to me make sense. But the biggest issue is, what is in that vaccine and how may it be manipulated for the future when it comes to pandemics, which may also be manipulated, because a lot of information has gone out about what China is doing and what it's manipulating, as well as the globalist agenda. And as we saw with cover-ups with CDC, and of course there's a whole host of other media and governments that are working closely with these kinds of countries and won't crack down on them the way Donald Trump wants to. So just to deviate a little bit here about these chips, by the way, and I'm not connecting them to the vaccine, but it may be a next step. In Sweden, and this report came from 2018, that they were already embedding microchips under the skin to replace ID cards. And this report came from Business Insider, that in 2018, so now the number has gone up and there are other countries practicing similar, where some 3,000 Swedish people had already inserted that microchip into their bodies to make their daily lives easier. So they could now unlock machines in the machines to unlock in their office, if they go to the gym, rather than taking up some key card. So it's being presented as something that gives you more access to convenience, and people are going into it. But the question was raised in that very article back then, what about biohacking? Because it's now on the rise. Why are people even taking this chip? And the number has escalated, and that's what I find troubling. People are willing to take that chip. So it does give you an idea of what's already there and what we're headed for. A little bit about Sweden, by the way. It's in a big mess because many of you saw reports that Sweden was in good shape despite not paying attention to the lockdowns. Well, it's not. Sweden is now in a big mess because in a report that just came out that was ran on Jihad Watch, cases of novel coronavirus in Sweden have reached, according to reports, some almost 24,000, with the death count near 3,000. And that happened suddenly as of Thursday, according to the latest figures from the country's health ministry. So it isn't quite working out for Sweden the way they thought. They were living like nothing matters, and they do it too when it comes to their globalist open door policies. And by the way, there are Islamic gangs in the country that have been responsible for shooting up the place, for creating no-go zones in traditionally well-to-do areas, and bombs that have been going off like crazy in that country. This is what's happening, and it's escalating now in the midst of coronavirus. So all in all, corruption needs to be uprooted. Your rights need to be protected, including your right to bear arms. As we try to make sense of this madness, we need to really pay attention on what's going on out there. So in brief, some other issues that we're going to look at here in Canada. Trudeau's already mulling over making, let me just, I got to deviate back here, making the virus, by the way, mandatory for Canadians. Okay, so that's one point I want to make. And Canada has also pledged $850 million of our taxpayer dollars over in Canada for the global fight against coronavirus. $850 million given to the World Health Organization. And now, the Liberal government is prohibiting hundreds of military-grade assault rifles, including 2 rifles that were used in last month's mass shooting that you may have heard of in Nova Scotia, where 22 people ended up dead. So what's going on here is that Trudeau is exploiting that mass shooting and the fear of people. He even came out and said that the vast majority of gun owners use their guns safely and in fact store them safely and use them responsibly in accordance with the law. They're just collectibles, that's what they do. Or they may use them for sport shooting or whatever they're using it for, it's been responsible. But he goes on and adds, but you do not need an AR-15 to bring down a deer. I am not a hunter. I haven't known many, but I don't know how many people go out there. Some do with AR-15s to bring down a deer. Most people that I'm aware of and I hear about in this country, in Canada, that has that. It's for collection purposes. They're even in museums. That's why they do have gun collectors. Now I know that in the States there have been catastrophes involving the AR-15, but I'm also talking in Canada. But when all is said and done, even for your folks in the Obama administration and the globalists over there that are advocating for the banning of guns, the biggest problem, do they really think that gun bans are going to stop it? It won't. What they're doing is disarming responsible people, and illegal guns will always be on the market. For instance, in Canada, we have certain laws regarding native lands, and I had spoken years ago to a specialist that dealt with organized crime, and he was indicating, and this has gone on forever, that on these native lands where police don't have the same jurisdiction, so it's a two-tier system, a lot of illegal weapons are being stored in these lands, so you don't have access to them, but they get distributed to the underground. So you'll never get rid of illegal weapons. We know that. Like, we can't be that naive. You're not going to get rid of that. So what they're doing is disarming the general public. One question: why do you think they want to do it? When you go back to America and the founding fathers, the real reason wasn't simply for hunting or for a woman to go out there and feel safe for carrying a handgun, or even for gun collections. It was to protect the Constitution in case you're facing tyranny. And that's exactly what we're facing now in the world, in America, in Canada, and in Western country. The Red-Green Alliance is building and has made disturbing progress. So looking now, and I'm going to go a little bit over there about what's happening in Britain, and this is my beef here. First of all, and before I get into that beef, I'm kind of worried now what's going on in Britain and wondering what's happening on the English Channel, because hundreds of people, illegals from Islamic countries, are coming in there, particularly from Iran. And one particular Afghan people smuggler, he came right out and said, you don't have to worry, it's safe. The police aren't going to do anything in Britain. Bring your people. It's perfectly safe. There's no danger. Go ahead and bring them. Nothing is going on. The government, before elections, promised, the UK government, to do something about the English Channel and the hundreds that are continuing to come in. 91 came in one day alone last week, but it continues. Now, you look at a guy like Nigel Farage. He has gotten so angry about this. He went out there to take videos of them coming in, and the police stopped him, and he says, I'm not going to stop this campaign against the government for what's happening, and they refuse to do anything about it. Why? This troubles me, frankly, and I do wonder what's happening there. Now, going into on my high horse here, which has really been getting me, is the victimization we see by the Muslim rape gangs. It has already been shown again and again and again that the vast majority of these Muslim rape gangs comprise of Pakistanis, Muslims. Now, they'll say Asian grooming gangs. Please, there's nothing. Grooming is such a ridiculous word, and Asian is equally ridiculous in this context. So in 2018, under the Home Secretary then, who was Sajid Javid, he wanted to do an ethnics origin study of Muslim rape gangs, because in his words, we are looking at what this data can tell us about the characteristics of offenders, victims, and the wider context of abuse, all of which have critical bearing on the effective targeting of prevention activity. And that is absolutely correct. When you look at the whole field of social science research, it's based on human behavior to try to elicit ways that we could deal with certain maladies that are happening. And that's a very important factor. For instance, if you're dealing with Muslim rape gangs, a lot of them come right out and they don't make any bones about it. Even ISIS came out and issued a manual on how to take infidel girls. It's written in there. It's in the Quran. It's in the Hadiths that infidels are allowed to be taken as sex slaves and used and abused. So we see something here. We see a supremacy here. We see insults of these girls, calling them the worst names. Sikh girls have also been taken in Britain, by the way, but most of them, in terms of numbers, were the white girls, and they are so foully treated. One girl recently, that reports say she was raped by some 100 of them. People on the left started to bully this girl and call her a whore, call her all kinds of names about her race, and she's the victim. And in the meantime, you have MP Naz Shah, who was with the Labour Party, coming out and saying, retweeting that victims of Muslim rape gangs should shut up for the good of diversity. What kind of diversity, for Pete's sakes, have we allowed in our countries? So this is my beef about what's going on in Britain, and I don't understand why that the government now has refused to release the data on those gangs, which is very important in terms of assimilation models, as well as who you let in to your borders. These are very important to determine strategy when it comes to immigration and how you deal with who you have inside your borders. So I don't know why the government is reacting this way. We expected more from this government, but there are a lot of questions out there, and people need to be on top of that. So moving ahead here on some of the other quick titles, I already went through about, oh, no, I didn't mention this actually, that Al-Qaeda has now called for Muslims in India to wage jihad against that country. So you've got Al-Qaeda doing it, you've got Kuwait that has gone to the OIC, you've got Pakistan that's gone to the OIC, and you have a huge internet campaign going on against India, and it really does center around Kashmir. Lebanon is seeking $10 billion in a bailout from the International Monetary Fund. And we need to understand here, and this is something worth researching for you, that Hezbollah is increasing a lot of power in Lebanon and even holding seats in their parliament and proliferating. So this needs to be watched very carefully on how that 10 billion will end up being used. And we know if it's Hezbollah, and we know what's governing what their intents are. So the IMF, we have to keep our eyes on that as well, because let's not forget the International Monetary Fund has been one of the leaders in promoting Sharia finance as well. So in looking at something else now, going over to Germany, Germany surprised everybody and issued a ban of Hezbollah. And a lot of people said, nah, that country, it doesn't make sense, because looking at globalist Germany, how could this be happening? It's fake. But they went ahead and they raided mosques, and it has gotten a lashback from Iran and from other terrorist organizations that are saying they're going to pay a price for doing so. So it looks like it is happening. But we also need to understand something about Angela Merkel. She flip-flops all over the map. Sometimes she seems to be on, well, the globalist that she really is, but other times when numbers aren't quite going her way, she makes a flip the other way. She came out on an Israeli TV show and said openly that the rise in Islam, in anti-Semitism, is because of some of those of Arab origin, she said, and you wouldn't expect that to come from her mouth, but it did. So she flip-flops depending on what the agenda is in the moment. So it could very well be that this is going to follow through to multi-levels. So we keep our fingers crossed. We hope it happens, and we hope that other countries will adopt that kind of policy against Hezbollah as well. Something else to watch for, the UN Migration Pact. A lot of people thought somehow that it's dead because it's been out of the news, giving us a mistaken impression that maybe it was abandoned. It got lost, frankly, not on coronavirus. It got lost when the Central American caravans started to flow in. People just kind of lost interest in what was going on there. We didn't hear anything about it, but it's far from defunct. Now it's come out that an announcement came from the UN that governments need to immediately take steps that several governments have already taken to swiftly release migrants from detention and provide access to healthcare, housing, and services, regardless of migration status, unquote. That's scary stuff. And the UN Migration Pact was mentioned because it has not been abandoned. It's just revving up for the next phase. So all in all, the world is in a bit of a mess, as you rightfully know, but my hope is that you will keep on reading, learning, and make sure that whatever decisions you make, it's with informed consent. And that brings me to the close for my analysis. And now I'm going to be giving the shout to Mary or Dick to come back on.
Thank you so much. That's just a riveting analysis across the globe, and with all kind of really good information. We do have a number of questions, Christine, as well as a general thank you. There are Canadians tonight writing in, and thanking you for your, not just tonight, but what you've represented to the Canadian populace through all of your work. So there's a definite an interest there. Let's just go back to the beginning and kind of work through, and we'll pick up questions where they come. One person mentioned that you cannot make the case that the call to prayer is actually a wake-up call reminding people it's time to come to prayer, because if that was what was needed, there are cell phones. People could have an app to remind people, hey, it's time to get on your knees and pray. So that's not the point. And we've got people identifying, of course, it's a statement of land being conquered. It's a political statement. And the interesting thing is just how weak political leaders are. And for example, you had quotes from the people, I believe it was in Halifax or Nova Scotia, the city council. You have to wonder why people are so quick to just use names to shout people down, and what is in their campaign for re-election. I mean, I think one of the things that this whole thing talks about is massive corruption. It's corruption, and I think we need to be very leery of almost anyone who runs for election. The minority will base their running on principles, but I hate to say it, but it looks to me like many people who are in political roles, and that's what they've done for their whole life, they're very susceptible to corruption. I don't think it's an overstatement to acknowledge that. You mentioned an anti-India campaign that we see globally. Isn't it interesting that Donald Trump spent time in India and had crowds?
Welcome like a star.
Okay. So if the world is pretty binary and Trump derangement syndrome is pretty much a worldwide phenomena, it's not surprising in a way that people would tee off on India. Your comments about Tablighi Jamaat in Pakistan and the impact that the terrorists have had from Pakistan, funded by Pakistan, whether it's the Taliban or all the terrible things that have happened in India, reminds us that Philip Haney and Jim Phelps, Philip Haney, of course, did extensive work on the Deobandi movement, which you mentioned. I think you said that many mosques in North America, I think will include US, are visited by traveling people from the Deobandi movement. The Tablighi Jamaat are typically brought into mosques and crank them up to be more Islamic, to be more aggressive, to be more fundamental and more like Muhammad. I think that's what you were saying.
What surprised me, though, particularly, was the assertion by Maclean's, a mainstream publication, that said all of the mosques have at one time or another had a member of this Tablighi Jamaat speak. And we know their origins. They're in India, but it's an Islamic Deobandi sect that's located in South Delhi. But it's a movement there that has gone global, and it is expanding rapidly. And it's frightening because they've mastered this image of being moderate and spiritual. So while the Muslim Brotherhood focuses, which is very deceptive as well, on charity to spread their dawah, you're looking at this organization that spreads spirituality. And it's become such a revival movement that there are certain places in Southeast Asia that's saying there's a Muslim born again movement. And you look at what Tablighi Jamaat is doing, they're behind almost everything now that we see emerging in that part of the world, and how they're developing and what they're doing. It's a revival movement that is rooted here in our country, and as you had indicated, and Phil Haney had indicated as well, and I'd mentioned before, also in America.
So most people who've been with us already know this, but for new folks, so the San Bernardino Mosque, the shooting in San Bernardino, the shooting in Orlando, etc. These are the kind of Deobandi-derived mosques that Philip Haney would talk about with great detail. And this whole notion of purging information is another point. There's just so much purging. When people censor you for what you're doing, that's a kind of a purge. They're purging people, and they're damaging people, so that people are less likely to do what you do, which is to speak up or to.
I got purged.
Fired, that would work. That would be a purge.
I'm fired in my appointment with the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, and my concern is all races, all creeds. My biggest concern are the victims of Islamic supremacism. I believe in human rights for all. I don't believe in this division, white people versus everybody else. We have anybody who understands the history of Islam, what normative Islam is, the oppression, the racism that goes on there. It's everybody that you should be caring about when you're into a so-called anti-racism industry, but it's become hijacked by the worst damaging players that are just escorting in this menace of Islamic supremacism and the jihad, and fighting for the worst to come in, especially now as we see under the UN migration pact. So as you're talking about a purge, that's what's happening.
The other connection with Pakistan, and I applaud you for bringing up the grooming gangs. Again, what a terrible word. These are typically young girls, very young girls, some of them in dysfunctional families, some of them in the care of the government, foster homes, etc. And they are, again, this happens to be a Pakistan situation. I'm going to make the assumption with Deobandi, etc. they really believe that Muhammad is telling them this is what's supposed to happen. Women are fair game, even 12 and 14-year-old girls. And so this is an organized activity. It is outrageous that the UK has had a terrible record of acknowledging that. Again, I'm going to assume that they have intentionally purged information, just like in America, which David Boris, our founder, talks about. The purge is overwhelming. The impact of purging information or purging the ability to speak out is devastating. And there's tens and thousands of young girls in the UK, and the UK has never come to grips with it. What a disgrace. And I think it's great.
Absolutely.
Again, this whole notion of fear, whether it's fear of a virus or fear of speaking out, I think we can clearly say that people who are moving into the area of tyranny, they love to use fear. They know how to make people afraid. It could be something like being afraid of not getting reelected, but it also could be fear of your own safety, your own physical safety. So we have an industry that builds fear, that can recreate and push a button. I think that's going to be with us all year. And I think relative to your comments about the vaccine, is very, very relevant. There will be people arguing all summer and into the fall about whether or not we should be afraid of for our health or afraid for losing our freedom. And it's going to be a day-to-day ambush back and forth. Well, we've got a bunch of questions. I will dive into them, and we'll just take them without any particular order, if that's okay, Christine.
Yes. Yes.
Let's see here. There's an acknowledgement that the Islamic call to prayer degrades Christians and Jews because of its supremacy call. I think that's just a comment. Another person mentions that they have a Muslim Shiite acquaintance or friend who indicates it's a political statement. The call to prayer
Yes.
is a political statement of supremacy.
Many Muslims have spoken out against it. Their voices are not being heard. Other visible minorities' voices aren't being heard either. It's the agenda-driven people that are beating up on others because they're a part of this agenda. But this has nothing to do with racism, and there's a hostility that is dangerous. What Diane Biederman that I mentioned indicated, that lady she should not have been victim to that kind of verbal abuse coming in through email by members of an elected people. Counselors in Halifax, Nova Scotia, writing that way to this lady because of her concerns that she should have, and many Canadians have. They don't want to hear about the concerns of the wider public. It's a narrow agenda, and we're allowing it to happen.
We have a comment from from Canada. Western Canadians are furious about Bill 103 and want to see it repealed. However, my favorite candidate, this is her speaking, Jim Karahalios, was stripped of his ability to go for his run for the Conservative president when he was angry that Aaron O'Toole, we talked about this before, a campaign manager, tried to introduce Sharia financing. So this is a person very, very well informed, as you talked about.
Jim's got a big following. He does, yes. Jim Karahalios has got a big following.
Okay. We are horrified about Trudeau's stance on Islam, but many of us are fighting it. CBC is bought by the Liberal Party and fights anyone who has a right stance. Maybe you should give Americans some more information about the CBC.
Yes, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, it's a government, basically. It's a government-funded agency. So you ask yourself the question, what else do you expect to come from the CBC? What's irritating is that while other stations have to compete and in the marketplace for viewers, they're getting bankrolled. So they have a blank check to basically say anything they want, because the bottom line is, although they were put in place to represent every culture and every voice in the country, they're going along the lines of what we see the federal government going with under a banner of diversity. They have taken the heart of what diversity really means, everybody, not the few, and they have become the mouthpiece of the liberal government. I'm not saying that there aren't some reporters in there that report on the truth. You do see some reports on the truth, yes, like in most media. I mean, even the Globe and Mail, that's considered quite far left, they published an article that was completely, practically ridiculing of the gun ban idea. So I don't like to damn something completely, because even the Washington Post comes out with surprising information sometimes. But the CBC is a bad problem in Canada. We are funding it. I am funding it. Every Canadian that might be now with us or will watch this is funding that. So the garbage they put out and admitted to about China, we funded that. And what bothers me is the conservatives were in, and this is, now I'm on my high horse, the conservatives were in power 2 terms. Why was it that they were not, the CBC, brought into accountability, into balance to represent all Canadians, or otherwise stripped of that blank check to be able to be bankrolled that kind of money? I think it's some $1 billion a year to be spreading propaganda on behalf of a government that's becoming increasingly totalitarian. It's troubling. And they have a big viewership that believes the garbage they're saying, much like what we see with CNN. That's Canada CNN.
Okay, another person had a question about Trudeau's stance towards China, mentioning that Trudeau refused to thank Taiwan for donating 500,000 pieces of medical supply, PPE, to Canada. So maybe you could just say a little bit about how Trudeau interacts with China in terms of not addressing their problem.
Okay, you just answered it right there when you said not addressing the problem. Trudeau is not addressing the problem. Trudeau is, again, starting to look more like Angela Merkel. Not that he's always been not being a flip-flopper. He is in a bind right now because it's come out openly what China is. I applaud the fact that he ended up bringing in the hydrochloroquine from India. I applaud that move, okay, because it does indicate something unto itself. But when you look at the relationship Canada has traditionally had with China, Trudeau is part and parcel of that. If you look at Trudeau, he is basically Canada's Obama. In every sense of the word, he has stripped certain terms from manuals that investigate terrorism, just like the US has done. He has basically fallen right into the same footsteps as Obama. He is Obama Jr. here in Canada. So in terms of trying to figure out what his view is, that man can't be trusted. He has been part and parcel of what's going on in China. He'll go wherever the money is. He'll go wherever he can. That man is spending money free sheet over here. Look at the money he just gave to the World Health Organization. What does that tell you? Look at how the World Health Organization was at the beginning and still in many ways covering for China. So if you look and you connect the dots of where Trudeau's is putting Canadian money, what he has espoused historically in terms of his policies with China, you'll realize that this man is in thick with communism as well as Islamism, because the evidence follows it. Look and you'll find it.
We have some knowledgeable people. They're commenting the CBC gets $1.2 billion a year. There's just a comment. Another comment indicates that you've done an interesting job of talking about Hezbollah in Germany, and that is interesting. And this person, actually, it's Claire, says Hezbollah, the ban, so-called ban in Germany, is on activity only, not the group as a whole. So it sounds like Angela Merkel, as you indicated, is tiptoeing through the tulips, even though she's taken a stand. Apparently, the group is not banned, but they're watching or monitoring the activities of Hezbollah.
Well, they're doing that, but they're also saying that they're banning the group altogether, and this has prompted Iran to come forward. And I know that there's some disagreement there. Some people are saying, no, it's not really a full ban, and others are saying, yes, it is a ban. But when you look at the reaction coming from Iran and coming from these kinds of terrorist organizations, you realize, well, then it's obviously something that's not too much in their favor. But the articles that have come forth have indicated that it's a ban of Hezbollah. Will it turn out to really be that way? We're watching. Everybody's watching. We'll see. So there is that little question mark because people are in doubt. People are saying it's activities. Articles are saying it's actually Hezbollah. But we'll see in terms of the actions of Germany that are coming up, because already they've surprised a few people.
Okay. Let's see here. How do you think the financial stress being felt by oil-producing Muslim nations, I think you're talking about Iran and others, will affect financing and the spread of Islamic propaganda and terror? In other words, we hear about the countries in the Middle East having, as the price of oil goes down, any comments on the impact on spreading terror?
They'll take from the people. They will never, ever let their spread of terrorism go. They will take from the mouths of the people. In Iran, it came up, and I believe I may have mentioned it in one of my briefings, and if I didn't, well, I'm doing it now or I'm doing it again, where money that started to come in, because you're well aware, Dick, that many countries were calling on Trump to relax restrictions on Iran because of the suffering of the people. It was discovered in documents that any bit of money that was coming into Iran, specifically to help the people, it was being rerouted and diverted to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. So they will see all of their people dead first before they stop terrorist activity. They will never stop. Yes, oil prices have gone down. Yes, they're having problems. Even when you look at a country like, for instance, Saudi Arabia, that's a very valid question, because Saudi Arabia has lost a lot of funds. But if you notice their strategy, they're reaching out now to a lot of Western countries, telling all kinds of lies about reform. Yes, they've done a few things, but when you look at and you trace the money, and you follow the dots of where this country continues to fund still in terms of its Wahhabism and its terrorism, it really hasn't stopped. But it's changed its marketing to the world, and it's trying to work alliances, shift alliances for support to increase investments in its country. And right now, when you look at a country like Iran, for instance, they do have supporters like China. So what these people are going to do, what the Jihad is doing, is that they are focused now, how do we get world partners that support us, to support our agenda, to support what we're doing? And they won't come out and say, look, China is paying into our ammunition to kill you, but that's what they're doing. So they're shifting their business strategy in order to attract more money to keep their agenda going when it comes to the jihad, even lying to people. And yes, I know it raises a lot of questions. Why is Israel doing business with Saudi Arabia? But Israel also needs to, because it's faced with issues with Iran, and that's a whole other ballgame. Partnerships are forming now, as Israel put it, and I saw it firsthand when I went on a tour. The Israel Government Tourism Office had an event where Christians to further that partnership with Christians, and we saw some government people talking. They referred to it as an iceberg relationship. They didn't call Saudi Arabia friends, but they also have needs in terms of it's their own suppliers when it comes to oil and so on. So they've been working with Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia, the downside is they do fund terrorism. Iran, it funds terrorism, and it will ally itself with China. So you get the drift of the drift of what I'm saying, the gist. They're changing business strategy to make up for that shortfall. And this is what they're doing. And they will starve their people before they stop spreading jihad.
Really very important comment. Thank you very much for that. If that's all we did tonight, I think it would be so worthwhile. Thank you so much for that comment. We've got somebody that says Trudeau respects China's leadership and desperately Trudeau wants a seat on the UN Council.
Yes, he does.
China would have a major bearing on, and therefore Trudeau throws billions at the UN, at any UN initiative. So it sounds like we always said that about Barack. Barack Obama would love to be on the UN in a leadership position. It sounds like Justin has eyes on a bigger position. That
was a big reason when Canada was first in crisis over coronavirus. Trudeau was nowhere to be found because he was all over the world trying to gain support in countries that will support him and his agenda, because he's desperate to get a seat on the UN Security Council. So that's absolutely correct. Excellent comment, as well as the others, by the way. You guys have great comments.
This is a wonderful group of people that we have. We really want to.
They sure are.
Again, if you're on YouTube Live, it's a great opportunity to listen to this program, get to know Christine. You probably, if you want to submit questions, you're going to need to go ahead and register on Zoom at the unitedwest.org at the Sharia Crime Stoppers page. You can see a registration item there, and then you'll be able to throw these questions at us like we're getting tonight. A couple more. There's a comment that says, I believe that the mosques, that mosque is the main hotbed of Islamist hatred and incitement. Is there any surveillance of mosques being done by the FBI, the CIA, or any intelligence agencies in the US or around the world. I guess this is an important background question. Is anybody monitoring mosques in Canada?
No, that's what got me fired. That was the biggest. There were two big reasons that got me fired. One was advocating in Iceland. When I was there, there was an article that I wrote following the visit to Iceland, my warning to Icelanders. And as part of that article, which was published in the largest newspaper there, the Morgenbladet, it advocated surveillance of mosques. It's needed, it's desperately needed. But you see, it was viewed, and we had somebody from Iceland, a social justice warrior, calling up the government, complaining, how could she be on the board, the whole bit. So in terms of surveillance of mosques, no, that's been an absolute no-no in Canada. And I always come out and say, if I was the leader of a church, and I was preaching and somebody said, your church has a lot of people coming to it, and there are a few people there that are hiding out because we suspect they belong to the mafia, or we suspect they belong to whatever gang, I would invite them in. I would say, you come in and you listen every Sunday. I'd be happy. Let them hear the message. Let them be part of our church, because I have nothing to hide. But surveillance of mosques have been a no-go zone in Canada and elsewhere, because you've got groups like CARE, Can, which is NCCM, that will come out and scream bloody murder for merely suggesting surveillance of mosques because it's racist. Meanwhile, surveillance of churches did happen, by the way, during the huge era of the mafia. But it will not happen in Canada that I can see. I don't know if it ever will, but no, it's not happening here.
Well, it's a major observation that the United States, even under Donald Trump, as far as we can tell, there are not active surveillance of mosques. In fact, we know that there are 375 mosques that have been surveilled by a third-party private citizen.
Private, yes, that's being done.
We know David Gabatz, and we also know that people that work with David. We also know that David's results are published on Jihad Watch. We also full affidavit signed. When he signs it as an affidavit, it means, for example, he stands behind it. Come and get me, take me to court, sue me. And as of right now, no one has taken him on to sue him on his surveillance. But the rest of the story is that jurisdictions, the people in Pensacola didn't do anything about it. We have a great governor in Florida, but he's doing well on a lot of things. Nobody used the information on the Pensacola mosque that Dave did. The mosques that were done in Georgia, nobody took advantage of learning about that. The mosques are so sacred that when David Gabatz went into 3 mosques in Savannah, Georgia, the Tehran newspaper covered the story and demonized not just Dave, but the other people that were in the mosque with Dave as witnesses. We also know the fact that the FBI has actually visited people who participated with Dave Gabatz. So we have not just no surveillance, we have an antagonism in America for anyone who would question that the mosques need to be surveilled and that would actually produce reports. So it is a major black eye for the United States that Dave Gabatz's work is basically not pursued by law enforcement. Again, we'll go back to the word purge. As a result of the purge, they will not touch that, and that is a major catastrophe.
And it's worse in Canada under M103, way worse.
Okay. One last question on the virus, and maybe this will be the last question, and that's the notion. The point is that worse than a vaccine, it has been suggested that we should have to carry identity cards with us telling others whether or not we have had the virus, maybe even whether or not we participated in testing for the vaccine, whatever. So this whole notion of contact tracing, identification, whether it's a chip or God forbid a yellow star, that we have to somehow identify ourselves as on the totalitarian team, or to be called out as people who respect our own freedom and choose to make an informed decision, which you've done a great job of helping us understand. An informed decision on the vaccine.
Thank you.
Is really important. And more than that, it's also the whole notion of how fear can be used. We are in the midst of a global fear campaign, and it happens every day, all the time. So we have a couple of announcements, Christine, if you want to hang with us for a couple of announcements and maybe have a final comment, if that's okay.
Sure.
We've got about a 5-minute little interlude on things we might talk about. So hang with us, people, please. we're actually going to make a connection. Christine is a senior editor at FrontPage Mag, and FrontPage Mag has a picture of this
Associate
gentleman.
editor.
You recognize him. He has an American uniform. It looks like a Chinese Maoist outfit. And FrontPage Mag, Christine, Daniel Greenfield, the exceptional Daniel Greenfield, has an article about how Joe Biden actually has been selling out America for years, including his work, which most people would not even have any knowledge about, with Hollywood and the infiltration of Chinese money, Chinese stories, Chinese plot lines into our entertainment business. So I just want to make that comment. When we hear about Trudeau, we should be thinking about Joe Biden, the way that he would be dealing with China. A couple of other comments, and then we'll. So, by the way, one of the comments here, we have we understand that there are states that have an unemployment rate that is like the Depression in 1929. Michigan has a 16% unemployment rate right now. And the question really we should be looking at as we look at this election, which we've been focused on the whole year on Sharia Crime Stoppers, can Trump win if the restarts across the country fail? We brought to your attention before, we want to reiterate, there is an organization that has a detailed model of the counties in the United States that make up our states. Restartnow.io/models has detailed county by county models that can help intelligent people make smart decisions about restarting their state. If you see a blue state or an orange state, that means that they are one of 21 states that have been fully modeled. We would invite you as activists, if you have a state that's got a model, take a look at restartnow.io/model, look for your state, and begin to get that information to the people that are trying to open up your state. It's really, really important, and it's going to be a day-to-day struggle with the people that push the fear button and the people that want to open the United States to save the economy. Really quickly, one of the people that's done a really good job on this model is Jim Simpson. Jim Simpson happens to be running for Congress in Maryland. We invite you to look at his candidacy. Jim's got a great article at the Federalist. The new model, again, it's Restart Now that we're talking about, exposes the human losses from the shutdown. So take a look at that. These are some quotes from Jim Simpson. Jim says we're losing jobs to the tune of nearly 1 million jobs every day. And the Federal Reserve is spending $1 million a minute from our children's future to prop up individuals and business revenue. So we are not just responding to fear by shutting down, but we are diverting major parts of our American treasury to put it in the hands of people that are trying to stay alive in the business world. So we would commend this article to you. And frankly, we would commend that you get to know Jim Simpson. He is an economist, and what a gift it would be if he could be in Congress next year helping Donald Trump. Again, depression level unemployment, that's a quote, not just from the Anderson Economic Group. We try to source everything we say on this program. We want to bring to your attention that there are restart petitions around the country. There's a website, there's plenty of websites where the petitions are. Let's Open New Mexico for Business. Time to reopen Texas. California's want their freedoms back. It's time to open up Pennsylvania. These are petitions that you can participate in. That's one way that you can try to move the ball forward. Again, if we have depression level unemployment numbers, it would be very, very difficult for an incumbent president to ever win the United States presidency in the election in the fall. We are partnering with a lot of people, including people that are doing a really good job with webinars. So we're happy to tell you about other people's webinars. The Red Green Axis Exposed is an organization which includes Dan and Bev, our friends in Cleveland, and Jim Simpson, and they have a webinar this week on True the Vote. Another major concern, we've been focused on COVID and all of that. We should be fearful of the fact that major fraud, we talked about that earlier, not just fraud related to medical science, but fraud related to campaigns and elections. So this is a webinar you may want to deal with. If you just go to Red Green Axis Exposed, you can register for that webinar. We wanted you to know that Christine will be back with us in 2 weeks on the 25th. So our Monday night rotating news analysis programs will continue. We've got commitments from Christine and Claire and Leo. So next week will be Leo Holman and Christine on the 25th, Claire Lopez on the 1st, and on into July. This podcast and all the podcasts will be on Sharia Crime Stoppers YouTube page later this evening. So again, we invite you to spread that message. We've got a couple of Thursdays planned for you in May and June, the 28th and the 25th, May 28th, June 25th. Dr. Mark Christian is a very, very special person because of his insight. So his news analysis comes from his background as an imam, a former Muslim imam who is now a Christian convert. And we will get to see him on the 28th of May. That's it. And I guess with that, we'll throw it back to Christine. Christine, what would your message be for the people that are listening tonight in terms of how to deal with the kinds of topics you've talked about and how to continue to think? It's really important to make Americans think again, and you're helping us. What would your message be?
The time has come like never before to be confident in your own quest for information on what you learn, and you will find enemies even within your own household, some of you that don't want to listen to you. It's better to just try to get them educated. You can't force people to listen to truth, but my encouragement to you is to have confidence in what you're learning and what your instincts tell you, in the evidence that's there, and just go with that and find others that could support you, because this battle is going to get much worse. And it's not positive what I'm saying, but it's positive in the sense of you find support and let's start building better nations toward the truth in the face of something that has grown far too big and will get bigger if we give up now.
Well, the other benefit you bring us, Christine, is your in-depth knowledge of North America, and you tell us about North America as well as the rest of the world. So Canada is right there. If you want to see a progressive Marxist government, you can look at what happens there, whether it's a gun grab or M103 silencing people. So we have an opportunity, and I believe it's 170 some days to go to our election, go to our polls. Donald Trump's got challenges all the time. Those of us that believe as a business person he can dig himself out of the current situation. The economy has to come back. We are grateful that we have a CEO type person who can resurrect the economy, at least to the point to regain confidence in people that he's the guy that can carry us through a reborn economy into 2021. The alternative is just too difficult even to consider. So let's work together, let's stay positive, and we appreciate all that you give us in terms of your time. We'll be with you next week. And so, Mary, if you can end the program, we'll say good night.
Good night, everybody.
I will just say what a blessing you are to us, Christine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And you are too.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you, Mary. Absolutely. Good night.